what we're doing this week is we're moving on to the Civil War period. And what I just wanted to do was to put it in a mythological context. And at the risk of somewhat repeating something I would have said before, is that the initial and primary subject of myth is those times in life when chaos moves to order, and that's really the subject of the creation myths of the world. And when you look at them, you find that different nations have different chaos to order sequences, and one I've been working on with Margarita is the Popol Vuh, and they have a very interesting chaos to order sequence, because it's, for them, it's about trying something, and then if it doesn't work, they try again, and they try again, and they try again. But there are various other creation myths, and I think they're very interesting because they, in a way, I see as the sort of culture's DNA, where they go to when later on in the culture's development, they have another experience of going back from a time and a period of order and stability to a time of chaos. Because, and what I think it's worth thinking of the creation myths is they're the cultural description of how that culture archetypally tends to deal with those times when chaos re-enters the society. So in a way, myth, the subject of myth, is not everyday life. It's basically those times when chaos reappears in a society, where the fabric starts to break down, and as Yeats would put it, the center does not hold. So essentially then, at a time in society that chaos reappears, is a time when it will tend to revert back. Now, the thing, and this is one hypothesis of this particular program, is that because Ireland had been deprived very much of its inherent culture, that when the chaos of the famine emerged, a non-Irish approach to dealing with chaos was used. And that was the whole stuff we've been looking at in earlier sessions on Paul Cullen, the very much the strongman, which is a non-Irish way of dealing with chaos and the society falling apart, because hardwired in Irish culture is this whole approach of distributed power and community and relying on the community and fifth province kind of thinking. But anyway, if we look at the subject of myth, what you find out is that in the mythological cycle, it's always dealing with some form of chaos. And in the mythological cycle, that chaos is initially, in the Cessa story, it's floods. In the Partholonian story, it's plagues. In the Nemedian story, it's oppressive kingship and leadership, bad leadership. And then with the Firbolg, again, it's bad leadership. And in a way, they then come up with their response, which was the distributed power community approach. And then if you look at the Tuatha Dé Danann and the battles of Moytura, it's an external threat. So in a way, they are all moments that myth deals with that speak to a time when order moves to chaos in the body politic and in the culture. Now, if we even step back and look outside the mythological cycle, the absolutely at the core of the two other main cycles, the Cuchulainn cycle, the Torn, that is all about a civil war between Connaught and Ulster. And then within the Fenian cycle, there's another civil war which is between the Munster people and the Leinster, which is the Battle of Moyleana that we looked at the summer school in 2020, the one we had to do on Zoom. So it's arguably, and by the way, what you get to is those particular mythologies, you could easily take them as romancing the warrior, romancing the strongman, romancing Cuchulainn. But it's when you listen to that story right to the end that you realize that it's pointing out the ultimate tragedy in a culture is a civil war. So arguably, right at the core of Irish mythology is the moments of chaos, and right at the core of the most profound and awful of those moments of chaos is when a society descends into a period of civil war. And I think we saw some of that in the very interesting discussion we had on Thursday night with Ida Segara, with her. She was talking to her wonderful book, The Men and Women of the Anglo-Irish Treaty Delegation, and she talked about a collective shame that a peoples feel. And I think, you know, we can all have individual moments of trauma and falling apart, and one of the primary emotions that you feel during that period can be shame or guilt. But and in relation to the Civil War, there were definitely was acts that people felt deeply ashamed about. But what Ida was talking about was a even more profound collective shame, which was felt by the Irish people, because having dreamed of independence for 800 years, finally it came to be, and all that emerged was a grubby civil war, of which one of the most profound of the emotions was shame. So in a way, there was an enactment of the myth and the learnings about, you know, how awful a civil war wasn't hardwired enough to make any impact. So I just wanted to put the period that we're dealing in a mythological context by reminding us as to the subject of myth being chaos to order to chaos, the different types of chaos, and then the most profound of those, which is, of course, a civil war. So before we get going with Tom, what I thought we might do is move into breakout groups. Actually, I don't know that we can, or can we? Yeah. And oh yes, here we are. And just talk for a little minute of if you could each tell a story of an example of a civil war. And one of the other things about mythology is it's polyvalent. It can speak at many levels. What that means is I can have a civil war in my own head. I can have a civil war within my family. I can have a civil war within my community, my organization, my nation. And I don't want us to talk about family or personal, but if we could talk about an example of a civil war in a community or in an organization. Yes, Fiona.
I'm just wondering, is there any need to break into? Why don't we just stay in the main room?
Yeah, well, I would like to, just for this, if that's okay.
Yeah, okay.
Just because it's a smaller. So yeah, so I have set it up. So if we just spend 10 minutes talking about an example of a civil war in an organizational or a community context, or some community that you're involved with. So we'll do that for 10 minutes. You've been invited to go into a breakout.